Welcome to Phazon Labs, powered by the World 1-1 Podcast Network, and sponsored by Phazon Flakes, a radioactively delicious part of your mutagenic breakfast. I am, as always, your host, Larry the Bearded Wonder. Joining me in the lab this week is my friend, Mykell Morphball Mishap.
Not again.
And Phazon Labs is a show where we talk about our ideas for new Metroid games every week, and we bring them to you for your entertainment and amusement. So this week we've got a new pitch. Last week we had Mykell's Celestial Savior. This week where we're coming back to one of mine, and I was kicking it around, and I thought, we're in a post-Red world now. We've done a lot of stuff with playing with Samus's DNA and everything that she's kind of got going on inside of her, and I thought I'd really like to see a more story-heavy, less action-centric game where we get to where we have a reason to explore the universe that she lives in and see more of the worlds and meet more of the species and the characters in this universe. And so I hit upon the idea that with everything that's happened between Chozo DNA and Metroid DNA and X-Parasite infections and everything else, that it's eventually taken its toll on the Chozo DNA infusion that she received as a child, and that DNA is starting to break down now, and it's giving her issues with being able to access and use her power suit, because that's so integrally tied to her Chozo DNA that she's now essentially on a hunt across the galaxy to try and find a descendant of one of the Chozo whose DNA she received as a child, in order to essentially act as a booster shot and try and help fix the Chozo DNA breakdown. And I thought it would be a really neat way to kind of send her chasing all over the galaxy, hunting for clues to find another living Chozo, but a very specific one at that. And so kind of bouncing across and maybe even revisiting some of the worlds that we've seen before where we know the Chozo have been, including Elysia and Brio or Talon 4, and looking for clues that could lead her to that specific descendant that she could get that booster from to bring things back. And in my head, this plays more like an RPG than it does a Metroidvania game. I'm okay with seeing the series branch off and get experimental. Especially, just coming off Dread, I'm like, look, we've got a lot of goodwill going for the series. I think we're at a point now where it's okay to experiment and deviate a little more than it was back when Federation Force happened. And I'd love to see it. I'd like to see this kind of get a little more dialogue heavy and learn more about kind of the lore of the universe that she exists in as a whole.
You got to be careful with the whole dialogue heavy, though, because they tried that once and it wasn't great.
Oh, no, I agree.
Other M was a good game if you took the story elements away that they tried to ham in there.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun if you put it on mute.
Yeah. You can only hear the phrase "the baby" so many times before you want to stab your eyes out.
Right. But I think a big differentiator here would be the fact that this isn't so much her story as her trying to uncover and trace down, the story of somebody else that she's looking for.
Right.
And I think that's okay, because then you're not really disrupting somebody's established headcanon of what and who Samus is or is not.
What if, almost like due to an aftermath of the Metroid DNA thing, like she's almost having to cannibalize these people now?
Ooh.
Like it could have started with a with a little bit of a, what was his name, Ravenbeak.
Mm-hmm.
Like she basically ate him. Like what if that's almost a permanent thing to where she's almost kind of like a space vampire now?
I like the idea, but I fear that it would taint the character of Samus, because at that point she's no longer an altruistic force of good. She becomes as much of a liability as a force of good.
Yeah, I could see that.
That's the only place where my concern with that really comes in. But I think it'd be really cool to kind of, it's almost like she's on a journey of archaeological intent here, where she's looking for where this this descendant has been, and in visiting those places and finding those clues, figuring out where they went next to try and essentially find them and chase them down. So,
because there's not many of them left, right?
Insofar as we know, we canonically speaking, we don't have any definitive answers as to how many tribes there are or were, where they all went, given that it was they've been a nomadic species across the universe, and that there's been numerous civilizations who they've essentially touched and influenced over the span of their existence. So, because you see that influence in a number of places canonically already, including like I said, Talon 4, Brio and Alicia from Prime 3. Even the Luminoth have had at least passing run-ins and interactions with the Chozo as well from Prime 2. Not to mention, they had an established colony on Zebes and on SR-388. So, because Zebes is where Samus was raised.
I always thought it was pronounced Zebes.
Or Zebes.
I have no idea.
I think Other M actually had an official pronunciation at one point.
What's that?
I think there was an official canonical pronunciation in Other M for that. So I know they said it was Zebesian pirates.
Okay.
So yeah, it might be Zebes. But yeah. But no, I think it'd be a lot of fun. Like, I would love to, have to essentially go and hop from planet to planet and essentially interact with, some of the locals and find somebody and chasing down these leads of, they were here, 20 years ago, but they didn't stay long. And, this is where they were when they stayed. I don't know if it's going to help you any. And, from there, you're kind of going in and checking it out and seeing if you can find any clues that lead you to where they may have gone next to eventually try and catch up with them. So you're essentially playing, instead of a bounty hunter, a detective. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like the detective mode on the Batman games.
Exactly.
I could see that being neat. Like, you show up and here's the civilization they helped build, but they've been gone for eons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd really dig that, and then not to mention, I would love to see a little bit more of her essentially getting to emotionally touch a piece of her past that she's connected to.
Yeah.
So, essentially maybe getting like flashbacks of, her adoptive family from when she was a child.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a much better way to explore her past as a character than what they did with Other M.
I think they'd have to handle it very delicately, though, because this could go into cheesy territory very simple.
Oh, it could.
Like, not cheesy, but so much as cliche.
Yeah.
And
you definitely have to have an end game in mind to really execute this without fucking it up.
right.
Instead of kind of working it out as you go along, which is kind of what I'm doing here. You know, I just kind of had a base run idea, and I'm like, you know, well, that's kind of what we do here. We workshop this and see what the fuck we come up with. But but that's half the fun of it. But yeah, that's kind of my thought and where it's at. Now I know you had you actually had an idea to contribute here when we were talking a few minutes before we hit the record button. So why don't you toss that out there? Because I rather liked that thought.
I don't remember. That was decades ago in Mykell time.
You had mentioned the DNA breakdown of her Chozo DNA, essentially meaning that she has to find. Yeah.
Basically the concept that since like her suit is starting to malfunction because the DNA isn't enough to power the suit anymore, so she almost has to find other unique tools to handle a lot of the same things until and I can almost see it being like kind of clunky in certain aspects to where like it still functions, it serves the purpose. Like I'm almost thinking a very Hollow Knight feel, like in that you get the new ability, but the new ability is not be all end all. You know, it's still it's a tool. It's not
just enough.
Fix everything. What?
Yeah, it would be just enough instead of overpowered.
Right.
So, I think too another thing that would work really well here would be if we could lean more into the visor aspect that they played with in Prime, and where you're scanning and you're looking, where that's much more integral to moving things forward instead of just picking up background lore as you go too.
So you're looking at this from a first-person perspective then?
Maybe at least partially. Maybe at points where you could optionally go into.
Okay. I guess with the like I said, with the detective mode part we were kind of mentioning, it would make a lot of sense. And the visors could definitely be useful for that.
Yeah.
Obviously heat signature and things like that.
Right. Or maybe given that, she can't necessarily access or tap into or use her suit, she maybe goes back to ZDR and lifts a piece of, headgear that Quiet Robe used, because, he was from the Thoha tribe, which was, more scientist leaning, and it's more a simple headpiece that has some of those features built in, but is more tuned specifically to Chozo technology and culture. So,
God, at that point, we could almost go further with the idea that she's literally having to remove parts of her suit and just almost plug in new pieces.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even have to be Chozo tech at that point. She's struggling to make it work, but you almost get a biomutant feel that you're building your own weaponry and things like that.
So, but no, that was kind of my thought, my idea. One of the things that actually really kind of excites me about this is that, given that there would be probably a significant amount of planet hopping, you'd hit on a lot of different areas where you could get really varied with the music design too.
You could almost go open world with some of these areas.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, when we were talking, almost kind of a No Man's Sky scale.
Yeah, like No Man's Sky meets Breath of the Wild meets Star Fox.
Yeah, Like, if you wanted to do an open world Metroid game, maybe this is how you do it instead of trying to force the open world concept onto a Metroidvania.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, because I can't fathom putting those two things together. They're almost counter each other.
Right. A good Metroidvania has to not exactly be linear, but every aspect of it has to be thought out.
Yeah.
And like, so it's almost diametrically opposed to being an open world game.
Right. You know, and I would love it too if honestly if it was big enough where there's some dead end red herrings where, you know, there's planets where you can go and interact with and you're looking for clues and stuff, and there's just nothing there. But in doing so, you get to see and experience more of the universe that she exists in. But maybe that's just me.
No, I think that would work, actually.
So, but no, I'd have a ton of fun with it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and I don't see it being real combat heavy, if at all. This is a much more narrative driven exploratory game, and you know, again with the concept of kind of maybe hitting on those flashbacks, it's a little more reflective as well. So, but
the tone would have to be very carefully monitored.
Agreed.
I would love the game to have a very somber tone.
Yeah. I could see that working exceptionally well.
Yeah.
But no, that's kind of the idea that was floating around my noggin for this week.
I like the idea of you getting to the ruins of a settlement that this person you're chasing created eons ago, that has literally, you know, been born, risen, blossomed, and died because so much time has passed. And like, so you're literally looking through the derelict ruins of their civilization that, you know, this person close to you helped create.
Right. I almost think that maybe a good place for this to start would be, you know, with this breakdown happening. Like, we witness her in the middle of, tracking down a bounty, and essentially her suit starting to fail her, you know, mid mission, and so she retreats back to the ship, and you know, after running some diagnostic scans, Adam's essentially the AI Adam on her ship is telling her, it's like, yeah, you got a problem, here's what's happening, and this is why. And maybe the kickoff would be going back to ZDR to try and see if Quiet Robe, you know, had any sort of journals or anything about, you know, lineage that she could use to start figuring out where to look.
Yeah.
So
I almost think, like, with that, you can start the game right after she, like, for instance, right after Dread, okay, when she's hyper powerful, okay? And as you're chasing down this bounty is where the DNA really starts to break down. So you start losing bits of your abilities, which this is a perfect example of why you start back at ground zero shortly after you start the game.
Yeah. I think it'd be kind of cool to, you know, go back to ZDR post Dread events as well. Just to kind of
up, though.
The planet? No.
Oh.
The floating fortress that Ravenbeak was hanging out on crashed because she drained all the power out of it. So there was nothing to hold it up in the air. But as far as I know, the planet's still there. And it might even be too that this gives a good reason for her to revisit SR388, or at least maybe try and find one of the floating chunks of SR388, since that was obliterated post fusion, and even go from there. Could even be an opportunity to revisit the scene of the pirate attack that killed her parents, where the Chozo found her orphaned.
Yeah. I think
this would be a really neat way to explore her history, as well as trying to save her future at the same time.
Yeah.
Somebody get Sakamoto on the line. I think we fixed his idea for Other M.
No shit.
So, but no, that was my thought.
I like it. I think we can do something good with this.
I do too. So, and I think, being able to go back to some of these places would give a really... You could almost get into some of that exploratory feel of a Metroidvania, because you're going back to some of these places that you've been, without it necessarily being just a direct retread, because the collapse of those places has structurally changed the layouts as well.
Right.
So, but I'd love to. It almost might be a neat way to get to revisit and see what's happening with the Itakuns and the Dachoras as well.
Mm-hmm.
You might need their help for something, in terms of not having your suit and your abilities to do certain things. You may have to rely on them for help, for some things like, speed booster type stuff or wall jump type things, since those are abilities that they have.
Yeah.
This could be one of the most canonically expansive things. What if she's having
to borrow DNA from other creatures? And she gets this directly from the Itakun by literally having to absorb a bit of their DNA. Again, this goes back into the whole, I'm the last living Metroid critter, because she almost has to siphon a bit of energy off them.
Mm-hmm.
And what if, as she does this, certain powers are almost, they're temporary.
Yeah.
Because, your choice is, you could siphon a little bit, or you could fucking kill the creature and have the power for longer.
There's another good reason to go back to ZDR at the beginning of this too, is, obviously Ravenbeak had something where he was going to be able to extract that Metroid DNA and pump it into, something else. So you've essentially got a genetic siphon.
I assumed it was the
could use it. Yeah.
Because
the Emmys would essentially be able to extract, but then you have to have a piece of technology on the other side to, move that DNA into something as well.
Because the Emmys finishing move attack is literally that proboscis thing piercing into you. So I assumed that was what it was doing, is harvesting your DNA.
Right. So, maybe she goes back and she gets a, one of the Emmy heads that are laying on the ground somewhere on ZDR, and, essentially smashes it together with whatever Ravenbeak was forcing Quiet Robe to use that would have infused it into something else. And that's your genetic siphon.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I still love the idea of her having to use the aspect that she's part Metroid.
I do too, but like I said, I think where you and I differ is coming off the end of Dread. I think that whole aspect of her is gone.
I don't think so, just because the Metroids were specifically designed to counteract the X-Parasites. Not the other way around. Not vice versa.
I'm
the
not
Metroids
saying
were the X-Parasites only actual predator.
Yeah.
So I don't think her absorbing, the quiet robe X parasite would actually negate the Metroid DNA.
Not the X parasite piece. I think the parasite was essentially the vehicle with which to hit her with that extra blast of Thoha DNA to knock out the Metroid DNA.
Maybe. I really hope it's not done. I love the concept.
Oh, I agree, but my suspicion is that it is done. I mean, Sakamoto has said it's done.
That aspect completely?
Yeah, because, that was what he said in that very first interview when they unveiled Dread, was that, this is the final chapter of the story of Samus and the Metroids.
Boo.
That chapter, that story is closed now. It's complete. So I think he's
ready
to
shit on my dreams there.
I know. Well, hey, take that up with him. That was his decision.
I blame you.
Go ahead. So, but I think we've hit a point where we got to put a title on this bad boy.
I think you're right.
What are you feeling? I've got an idea, but I want to know what comes to mind for you.
I've got nothing, honestly. Okay. It's such a vast concept, and there's so many different ways you could go with it.
I'm thinking I would be perfectly okay if I pop this in my Switch and the title screen comes up and there's Samus, picture of Samus, the title screen hits, The Descendant.
Yeah, that works.
I like it. That feels like it hits just right.
Yeah.
So.
Either that or Ancestors. Something along those lines.
We could. I feel like Descendant hits a little better and a little more on point, given that, we're talking about looking for, the descendant of the Chozo that, gave her the DNA in the first place, as well as, kind of the fact that she's essentially an adoptive descendant of the Chozo as well, and their legacy.
Right. Okay.
So, actually, that's another one that's not a bad title either. It would just be Legacy of the Chozo.
Yeah.
But I feel like The Descendant just hits better. So, but yeah, I think I want to roll with The Descendant.
All right, let's do this.
You got
Put it into production.
Yep.
Ship it.
Yep. The manila envelope has been slipped under Sakamoto's door by our secret agents inside Nintendo headquarters. He'll find it on his desk Monday morning when all of you hear this episode.
All the page says is, Descendant, do it.
Right. Descendant, figure it out, damn it. So, all right. Well, I want to say thank you to my lab partner, Mykell. And thank you to everybody that tuned in and joined us this week. We hope you've had some fun with this idea. And if you have ideas of your own, feel free to reach out and hit us up over on the Twitters at Phazon Labs. You can drop us a DM, and if you've got a great idea, we'd love to have you on the show. Have you come visit the lab and tell us all about it as well. So with that said, you can catch Phazon Labs as well as a host of all kinds of great programming here on the World 1-1 Podcast Network. Press start to engage your mind. Peace!